The fire had eaten the house 12 years ago, but the smell still lingered, wet ash, rusted metal, and something beneath it that the rain couldn't wash away. Sergeant Luke Mercer stood at the edge of the property, flashlight trembling in his hand. His K-9 partner, Shadow, had led him here on a missing person case. But the dog had stopped, froze at the threshold of the charred doorway, hackles up, teeth bared, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. Luke had seen fear in men. He had never seen it in Shadow. The fire had eaten the house 12 years ago, but the smell still lingered, wet ash, rusted metal, and something beneath it that the rain couldn't wash away. Sergeant Luke Mercer stood at the edge of the property, flashlight trembling in his hand. His K-9 partner, Shadow, had led him here on a missing person case. But the dog had stopped, frozen at the threshold of the charred doorway, hackles up, teeth bared, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. Luke had seen fear in men. He had never seen it in Shadow. Sometimes the past doesn't burn. It waits. Chapter 1. The House That Shouldn't Breathe. The rain came in thin, whispering needles, coating the world in silver. Luke's boots sank into the soft mud as he stared at the ruin in front of him. The burned house sat like a wound in the earth. Black skeleton beams, walls half collapsed, a roof sagging inward. Nature had tried to reclaim it. Vines crawled through broken windows. Grass grew through the ash. But there was something wrong with the air around it. It wasn't just the smell. It was the stillness. Shadow's nose twitched. The black German shepherd pressed low to the ground, tail rigid. His growl was steady, alert, focused, afraid. Luke had worked with him for 7 years. He'd seen Shadow take down armed suspects, track lost children through blizzards. He'd never seen him like this. Luke knelt, hand brushing over the K-9's neck. "Easy, boy. What is it?" The dog's ears flattened. He refused to step closer. Luke glanced back at the flickering police cruiser lights down the dirt road. Beyond them, the town of Ash Creek was sleeping, or pretending to. Only one other vehicle had followed him, an old gray pickup belonging to Deputy Morgan Hale. Morgan stepped out, slamming her door shut, a cigarette between her fingers despite the drizzle. "You sure this is the right place?" "Shadow tractor sent here," Luke said. "He followed it from the woods, over the ridge. This is where it ends." Morgan looked at the house. "Jesus, this place." Luke knew what she meant. Everyone in Ash Creek did. The old Fenwick place, the one that burned down the night 3 people disappeared. No one talked about it anymore. It had become one of those ghost stories you told new kids at the diner. Something to scare, not to believe. But now, a young woman named Claire Donnelly was missing. 23, nursing student, last seen driving home after a night shift. Her car had been found 2 miles away, doors unlocked, key still inside. Shadow picked up her scent off the steering wheel and dragged Luke through the forest to this grave of wood and smoke. Morgan took a drag, exhaled slow. "You know the story, right? About what happened here?" Luke gave her a sidelong glance. "Everyone knows it. I just don't believe it." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to believe it for it to be true." He ignored that. "Call it in. Tell dispatch we found the trail's end. No entry yet." Morgan nodded, heading toward the cruiser. Luke turned back to the house. Shadow hadn't moved an inch. His body was shaking, not with cold but with restraint, as though some invisible wall was holding him back. Luke aimed his flashlight through the broken front door. The beam cut through black dust and water vapor. The walls were scorched, the wallpaper long gone. But beneath the soot, something pale shimmered faintly, like a pattern of scratches etched into the wood. He leaned closer. Symbols, carved, deliberate, spiraling patterns running up the frame and into the beams above. Luke's stomach tightened. "Morgan," he called over his shoulder, "you might want to see this." But before she reached him, Shadow barked, short, violent, warning. The sound echoed through the hollow space of the ruin. Then silence. The flashlight flickered. Luke frowned, tapped it against his palm. The beam steadied. He stepped 1 foot inside. The air changed instantly. It was colder, unnaturally so. His breath fogged in front of him. He heard it then, faint but distinct, a low hum, like distant wind trapped inside walls. He turned toward the sound. A hallway stretched out, black and endless, deeper than it should have been. Morgan's voice came faintly from behind him. "Luke, don't go in alone." He didn't answer. Shadow barked again, but it wasn't defiance. It was pleading. Luke took another step. His boots crunched glass and charcoal. He swung the light to the left, saw a collapsed staircase, a melted chandelier, the remains of what must have been a dining room. Then he froze. There were footprints, fresh ones, bare feet. They led from the far end of the hallway straight toward him, then stopped at the line where the burned floor turned blackest. He crouched, touching the prints. Damp, recent. "Claire." His voice barely rose above a whisper. Something moved in the dark. Not a person. Not a shadow, either. The air rippled, as though heat shimmered from something unseen. He took a step back. The humming grew louder, deeper, vibrating to the bones of the house. Then it stopped, and from the dark, a voice came, a whisper so faint it almost sounded like breath. "Luke." His name. He spun, heart slamming in his chest. The flashlight beam cut across the walls. Nothing. Then something brushed his arm. Cold. Wet. He stumbled backward, colliding with the doorframe. Shadow lunged forward, barking savagely, pulling against his leash. Morgan ran up the steps, weapon drawn. What the hell happened? Luke's voice was unsteady. "There's something inside. I heard." He cut himself off. It sounded insane. Morgan aimed her light past him. The hallway was empty, just the dripping sound of rain through broken wood. "There's nothing here," she said quietly. Shadow growled again. Luke looked at his partner. "Tell him that." They searched the perimeter, staying close to the outer walls. Luke's pulse wouldn't slow. Every window seemed to watch. Every gust of wind sounded like whispering. Morgan found something near the back, half buried under collapsed beam. She crouched, brushing away debris. A shoe. Small, white, nursing shoe. "Claire's," Luke murmured. Morgan's expression hardened. "We need backup." This just went from weird to bad. Before she could reach for her radio, Shadow suddenly lunged, snarling, pulling hard toward the doorway again. "Shadow, heel!" Luke shouted. The dog didn't listen. He tore the leash from Luke's hand and bolted straight into the ruins. "Shadow!" Luke ran after him, flashlight beam bouncing off walls. He found the dog standing at the end of the hallway, in front of what used to be a door, blackened with still clinging to rusted hinges. The dog's body was rigid, tail stiff, teeth bared. Luke slowed. "Shadow, what is it?" The dog growled, one paw raised. The smell hit Luke first, wet iron and rot. He swung the light toward the door. Behind it, something moved. He saw the outline of fingers pressing through cracks. Too long, too thin, skin the color of ash. The light flickered again. "Jesus," he whispered. Morgan's voice echoed behind him, panicked. "Luke, get out." He reached for his weapon, but before he could draw it, the door creaked open. The flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed everything. And in that dark, Luke heard breathing, deep, slow, wrong. Then a sound that would haunt him forever. Shadow yelping once, sharply, in silence. Luke stumbled forward, shouting, "Shadow? Shadow!" His hand hit the ground, wet, sticky. Blood. He found the dog lying still, eyes wide open, no wound visible, but body cold as stone. The humming returned, louder, pulsing through the floor. Behind him, Morgan screamed his name. He looked up just in time to see the shape standing where the doorway had been, tall, distorted, like a figure burned into the air itself. It moved without sound, without weight. And when it turned its head, Luke saw a face, his own, staring back at him. He staggered backward, tripping over Shadow's body, breath breaking. The thing tilted its head, almost curious. Then it whispered, "You left us here." Lightning flashed outside. The figure was gone. Morgan reached him, grabbed his arm, pulled him toward the exit. "Move. Move." They burst out into the rain, collapsing near the cruiser. Luke turned to look back. The house was quiet again. No hum, no movement. just the smell of wet ash. Morgan radioed for backup, voice trembling. Luke knelt beside Shadow, hand resting on the still fur. "What did you see in there?" Morgan asked. Luke didn't answer. He couldn't, because whatever he'd seen, it had known his name. And when he looked down, he realized something else. Shadow's paw prints led out of the house. But so did another set, bare feet, smaller, fresher. They stopped right behind him. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a bruised sky and a silence that pressed on the town like a hell breath. Ash Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and everyone pretended not to know what they did. But by dawn, word had already spread. Sergeant Mercer found the Fenwick place again. Luke sat in the back of the ambulance, drenched, staring at the sheet that covered Shadow's body. The paramedics didn't know what to say. They'd seen the dog, no visible wounds, no struggle, just gone. Heart stopped, as if something had drained the life straight out of him. He fell hollow. The world moved around him in slow motion. The crackle of the radio, the flashing red and blue lights, the low murmur of the fire chief talking with Morgan by the fence. His fingers trembled against the silver tag that hung from Shadow's collar. He didn't remember how long he sat there. When Morgan finally approached, she looked different, drawn, eyes rimmed red, jaw tight. She held a styrofoam cup of coffee and handed it to him. "Autopsy scheduled," she said quietly. But the vet's not optimistic. Luke didn't answer. Morgan took a drag from a cigarette she hadn't even lit. Whatever happened in there, Luke, it wasn't natural. He looked up. "You think I don't know that?" She hesitated. "Then tell me what you saw." He tried, but every word felt like breaking glass. "It wasn't Claire. It wasn't anyone. It looked like—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Forget it. You'll think I'm losing it." "I already think you're losing it," she said gently. "But that doesn't mean you're wrong." Luke met her eyes. There was something in her tone, something not quite disbelief. "Why'd you come out here with me, Morgan?" he asked. She exhaled smoke. "Because I was there the first time this house burned." He blinked. "You were a kid. 17. She looked toward the ruins. "My cousin lived here. I was supposed to spend the night. I didn't. Power went out of home, and my mom said no. The fire started after midnight. They said it was faulty wiring, but—" Her voice trailed off. "They never found all the bodies. One of them, my cousin Lydia, wasn't recovered." Luke stared at her, the wind biting through his soaked jacket. "And you never told me that. You never asked." There was no accusation in her tone, just weariness, the kind that came from holding a story too long. A crack of thunder rolled far off, low and distant. Luke rubbed his hands over his face. "I need to go back in," he said. Morgan's head snapped toward him. "You're out of your damn mind. I saw something in there, Morgan, something that knew my name. And Shadow," his voice broke on a word. "He didn't die for nothing. That place did something to him. Maybe it can tell us what happened to Claire." Morgan shook her head. "You can't reason with what's in there, Luke. You survive it if you're lucky." He looked at her, jaw set. "You said your cousin's body was never found. Don't you want to know why?" She didn't answer right away. Her cigarette burned down to her fingers. She flicked it into the mud. "You've got 1 hour. After that, I'm calling the state police and sealing this place off." By afternoon, the sky had cleared, but the light was dull, washed out. The Fenwick property looked different in daylight, not less frightening, just realer. The charred wood, the warped metal, the faint traces of what used to be a home. A tricycle half buried in dirt, a melted mailbox. Luke stepped over the yellow tape and paused near the front steps. Shadow's paw prints were still there, leading to the doorway where he'd stopped. He whispered under his breath, "I'll find it, boy, whatever it was." He switched on his body. Cam checked his sidearm and crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was heavier. The smell of burnt timber clung to his throat. Every sound, the crunch of glass, the creak of floorboards, seemed to echo too long. He made his way to the back hallway. In daylight, the carved symbol stood out more clearly. He brushed ash from the wall and frowned. They weren't random scratches. They formed a pattern, repeating in circular loops that intersected like ripples. He crouched, took a photo, then noticed something else. A door at the end of the hall, one he hadn't seen last night. It looked newer, untouched by fire. Smooth, dark wood with a brass handle. That door shouldn't exist. He reached for the knob. It was cold, ice cold. The moment he turned it, the air changed. The house went silent, like it was holding its breath. The door creaked open. Inside was a small room, bare walls, dirt floor, and in the center, a mirror, old, tall, framed in scorched metal. He stepped closer, frowning. The glass was fogged, faintly pulsing as though it breathed. "Claire," he called softly. The reflection cleared. Not Claire, himself. But wrong. Eyes darker, face smeared with ash. Behind that reflection, movement, a flicker of something standing just over his shoulder. He spun. Empty room. He turned back. The reflection hadn't turned with him. It was still staring straight ahead, at him. Then it smiled. The mirror cracked. A scream ripped through the house. High, shrill, unmistakably human. Luke ran back into the hall. Morgan. No answer. He burst through the doorway into what used to be the living room. And stopped cold. The floor was clean. No debris. No soot. The walls were whole again, wallpaper blooming with color. A fireplace burned warm and bright. And standing by it was a woman in a white nightgown, hair tangled, skin pale. She turned slowly. "Claire Donnelly." "Claire," Luke breathed. "You're alive." Her voice came soft, trembling. "You shouldn't have come." He took a cautious step closer. "It's okay. You're safe now. We'll get you out." She shook her head. "You can't save me. You never save them." "What?" Her eyes filled with tears. "They said you'd come back, that you'd remember what you did." "I don't. Claire, I don't know what you're talking about." The fire behind her flickered blue. Shadows stretched across the floor, like reaching hands. Then her face twisted, not with pain, but with fury. "You left us to burn." Flames roared up around her, consuming her body in an instant, but she didn't scream. She just stared at him, smiling through the blaze. Luke stumbled backward, falling hard against the wall. The fire vanished. The room returned to ruin. And on the floor where she stood was a photograph, burned at the edges. He picked it up with shaking hands. For people stood in front of the Fenwick house. 2 adults, 2 children. One of the adults was him. Younger, cleaner shaven. But him, written on the back in faded ink. Luke Fenwick, summer 2008. His blood ran cold. He heard footsteps behind him. Morgan stepped in, eyes wide. "You found something?" He handed her the photo. "That's me, before the fire." She stared at it, then at him. "Luke, that's impossible." He pressed a hand to his temple, flashes pounding in his head. "Heat!" Screaming, a woman's voice shouting his name. Smoke, children crying, then a door slamming. He stumbled, nearly falling. Morgan caught him. Hey, look at me. What's happening?" He looked up at her, voice hoarse. "I think I started the fire." Morgan's eyes widened. "What?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The memory was a blur of smoke and guilt. The floorboards beneath them creaked. Morgan's radio hissed with static. Then, faintly, shadows bark. They froze. Luke turned toward the sound. "Did you hear that?" "Luke, he's gone." Another bark, closer this time. He moved toward the hallway, flashlight trembling in his grip. "Shadow." The bark echoed again, leading him toward the mirror room. Morgan grabbed his arm. "Don't. Please." He shook her off. "If he's alive, I'm not leaving him." He stepped through the doorway. The room looked the same. Bare walls, dirt floor, the cracked mirror. But there was something new. Paw prints. Fresh, pressed into the dust. They circled the mirror, then stopped at its center. Luke raised his flashlight. His reflection stared back, this time eyes glowing faintly blue. And behind that reflection, a dozen faces peered through the glass. Men, women, children, all burned, all whispering in perfect unison. "Come home." The mirror began to ripple. He felt a pull, like gravity shifting, air thickening. His heart hammered as his reflection reached forward, palm pressed against the inside of the glass. "Luke, get out of there." Morgan shouted from the hall. He took one step back. The mirror bulged outward, glass stretching like skin. Then it burst. Shards flew through the air. Something cold and heavy slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. He opened his eyes, staring into his own face again. But this one was burned, smiling, whispering, "You shouldn't have left them." Then it lunged. Luke woke on the floor outside, coughing hard, lungs filled with ash. Morgan knelt beside him, slapping his face. "Luke, talk to me." He gasped for air, shaking. "The mirror," it tried to pull me in. "The mirror's gone," she said. "There's nothing there. The whole damn room's empty." He looked toward the ruins. Through the smoke, faint figures stood by the house, motionless silhouettes, watching. Morgan followed his gaze, but saw nothing. "We're done here. You hear me? We're done." He nodded weakly, but deep down he knew the truth. The house wasn't finished, and neither was he. A long, quiet pause, wind moving through blackened beams. Some places don't forget the fire. They just wait for the ones who started it to come home. If you felt that chill, you're not alone. Stay close. The story isn't over yet. The town coroner said Shadow's heart just stopped. No trauma, no poison, no reason. Luke didn't attend the burial. He couldn't, the moment he saw the small grave by the K9 memorial. Something inside him cracked, the same hollow fracture that had been echoing since the Fenwick house. He spent the next 2 nights in his truck, parked outside the ruins. Couldn't sleep, couldn't leave. He watched the black skeleton of the house under moonlight, waiting for it to breathe again. On the 3rd night, Morgan found him. "You look like hell," she said, knocking on his window. Luke lowered it halfway. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." He didn't answer. She leaned against the door, arms crossed. "You remember more, don't you?" He stared out toward the burn walls. Flashes. Smoke. Someone screaming my name. He swallowed hard. A child. Morgan looked away. "I talked to the county records office. There was a Luke Fenwick, born here. House fire in 2008. His parents died. He was listed as missing, presumed dead." Luke's voice came out low. "So who the hell am I?" She hesitated. Maybe someone who didn't want to remember. He laughed once, a sharp, broken sound. Maybe someone who didn't deserve to. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the faint smell of ash. Morgan said quietly, "I think the house isn't haunting you, Luke. I think it's calling you." He turned to her. "You sound like one of those psychics on cable TV. Then tell me why your reflection smiled at you." He didn't have an answer. She flicked her cigarette into the mud. "If you're going back in, you're not going alone. I wasn't planning to." They gathered what they could. Lanterns, a thermal camera from the fire department, old blueprints of the house. The original structure had a basement, one never rebuilt, never excavated. It was supposed to have collapsed during the fire, but according to the blueprint, the mirror room sat right above it. Luke's hand shook as he traced a line with his finger. "It's still down there." Morgan nodded grimly. "Then that's where it ends." They entered just before midnight. The air was heavy again, thick with damp and memory. The moonlight bled to the holes in the roof, catching on bits of glass like scattered stars. They crossed the hallway, passing the wall of symbols. The pattern seemed to move in the lantern light, circles turning, twisting inward. Morgan's voice was barely a whisper. "You sure about this?" Luke tightened his grip on the flashlight. "No." They found the trapdoor under a pile of charboards, half buried in mud. The hinges groaned when he pried them open, releasing a breath of cold air that smelled like rust and wet stone. A staircase descended into darkness. Morgan hesitated. "You first." He gave a half-smile. "Fair enough." They went down slowly, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the black. The walls were brick, slick with moisture. Roots hung from the ceiling like strands of hair. At the bottom, the air grew colder still. The beam of Luke's light caught something scrawled across the far wall. Words burned into the surface. "We never left." Morgan whispered, "Oh, God." Luke stepped closer. The writing wasn't random. It followed the same pattern as the carvings upstairs. Circles within circles, but tighter now, like something trying to close in on itself. Then, faintly, he heard it, the sound of dripping water. No, not water. Footsteps. They echoed softly, circling the edge of the room. "Morgan," he murmured. She turned her light and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the basement. Tall, still, burned. Luke raised his gun. "Don't move." The figure tilted its head. When it stepped forward, the light caught its face, half melted, half human. A man, or what was left of one. "Luke," it said. His name again. Morgan whispered, "What the hell is that?" Luke didn't lower the gun. "Who are you?" The creature's mouth moved, skin cracking like old paper. "You forgot. You promised you'd stay." "I don't," he stopped, because suddenly he did remember. The night of the fire, the shouting, his father screaming at his mother, the oil lamp thrown in anger, the explosion of heat, his sister's cry from the top of the stairs, his mother's hand shoving him toward the door. "Run, Luke, run." He ran. He didn't look back. The memory hit like a blade. He dropped to his knees, breath shuddering. "I left them." Morgan reached for him. "Luke, don't listen." But the burned man was closer now, moving like smoke. "You left us to die. Now you'll stay and burn with us." The air rippled. The walls began to hum. The same low vibration from before, now rising into a painful whine. "Morgan, go." Luke shouted, "No way in hell." Flames bloomed from the cracks in the floor, blue and cold. Figures stepped out from the walls, faces blackened, eyes white. Children, women, men, the lost Fenwicks. They surrounded him, whispering in unison, "Come home." Luke backed up until he hit the wall. His light flickered, then died. The darkness pulsed. Morgan grabbed his arm. There's something behind the wall, an opening. He felt along the bricks, found a loose section, kicked hard. The wall gave way, revealing a narrow passage. They stumbled through, choking on smoke and dust. Behind them, the voices rose, filling the air like a storm. The tunnel sloped upward. Faint light shimmered ahead. They burst through another rotten door and found themselves back in the hallway. Only now it was burning. Flames climbed the walls, devouring everything. "Move!" Morgan screamed. They ran toward the exit. The floor buckled beneath them. Luke grabbed Morgan's hand as the boards gave way, dragging her to the front door just as the house exploded into a column of blue fire. They hit the ground outside, coughing, gasping, watching as the flames twisted upward into shapes. Faces, hands, mouths, before collapsing inward. And then silence. The house was gone. Not burned, not standing, just gone. A smoldering hole where it had been. Morgan's voice shook. "Tell me I didn't just see that." Luke stared into the ashes. "You saw it." For a long time, they didn't speak. Only the crackle of embers filled the night. Then, faintly, from the ashes, one sound. A bark. Luke's head snapped up. "Shadow." He ran forward, scanning the smoke. There, half buried in soot, a paw print. Then another. He followed them, heart pounding, until they stopped at the edge of the crater. Morgan caught up, breathless. "Luke!" He held up a hand. "Listen." A whisper came from the hole. Soft, familiar. "Go home, Luke." He closed his eyes. Tears burned down his cheeks. "I am home." The wind shifted. The ashes settled. And when he opened his eyes again, the paw print were gone. 1 week later. The Fenwick property was fenced off. Official report. Unstable structure collapse. No evidence of foul play. Luke and Morgan both knew the truth wouldn't fit in paperwork. Luke stood at Shadow's grave, fingers tracing the tag he still carried in his pocket. The morning was quiet. Birds starting to return to the fields. Morgan joined him, holding 2 coffees. "You really think it's over?" He looked toward the horizon, where faint smoke still hung. "I think it's never over. It just waits." She studied him. "And what about you? You gonna keep wearing that badge after all this?" He gave a faint smile. "Maybe. Someone's got to watch the dark corners." She handed him a coffee. "You're insane." "Probably." They stood in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. When she finally left, Luke stayed a little longer. The breeze moved through the grass, gentle, almost warm. He whispered, "Rest easy, boy." Then, faintly, so faintly he almost missed it, a bark came from the distance. He smiled, not because he believed in ghosts, but because some bonds don't end, even when the fire does. He walked away, leaving the burned field behind. As he reached his truck, he glanced back one last time. In the ash, for just a heartbeat, stood Shadow, watching, tail wagging once before fading into morning light.